Alexandra Smith is the state political editor at the Sydney Morning Herald and author of the new book, The Secret, a behind-the-scenes story of the rise and fall of former New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian, which is out now. Thanks for making time in your busy state politics day to talk to us here on Newsfighters. I guess, first of all, congratulations on the book. I've read it cover to cover. Very enjoyable read, looking at Gladys's downfall. I guess, first of all, what was it about Gladys Berejiklian and her story that made you want to write a whole book about it?
I just think that it was pretty extraordinary that she was able to, first of all, recover from the first revelation. So when it first emerged that she'd been in this secret relationship with Daryl Maguire, initially everyone was like, wow, she cannot survive this. This is extraordinary. But she did, and not only did she survive, but she became more popular in that year. Yes, this was 2020, correct?
So
2020, yeah.
So during the pandemic already, yep.
Yeah, we've had the first sort of shock of the pandemic. We've had the Black Summer bushfires in New South Wales, and the pandemic, obviously, and then this, shock revelation. No one saw it coming because obviously absolutely nobody knew about the relationship. And I just thought it was really extraordinary that she survived that. And I think it's because of the huge political capital she, built up because of the fires and the pandemic. And I really think, probably a lot of other people wouldn't have survived a scandal like that. But she didn't just survive, like I say, she became more popular. So it was a pretty extraordinary story, really, of political, survival.
But then there was her downfall as well. Surely that was just as interesting and fascinating.
Gladys Berejiklian is no longer our Premier, brought down not by the pandemic, not by the bushfires, but by her ex-boyfriend, former MP Daryl Maguire.
Just to refresh our memories, this was basically because of rules she set up herself about her own MPs. She stepped down because I remember in her resignation speech, she basically said she didn't want anyone who's being investigated by ICAC to still have their position.
As the leader of the New South Wales government, I have expected the highest standards of myself and my colleagues. I have made it clear on numerous occasions that if any of my ministers were the subject of allegations being investigated by an integrity agency or law enforcement, then he or she should stand aside during the course of the investigation until their name was cleared.
Yeah, like she set the rules. So her view was anyone who's under investigation by an integrity agency, whether it be ICAC or, there are others, of course, there are kind of, police integrity bodies and that sort of thing. Her view was that they had to stand aside. They couldn't remain as an elected, it couldn't remain in her party room at least, and certainly not in her cabinet. Obviously, she can't force somebody out of Parliament because they're elected. She can sort of certainly say they should go, but she can't force someone out. And so, it would be really hard for her to have hung on when she set those rules and enforced them previously, but yet didn't do the same thing herself. So, a lot of the Liberals were really angry with ICAC, convinced that sort of they forced her out. But sure, they initiated the inquiry, but she had to make the decision that her position was untenable based on the very strict set of guidelines that she'd implemented and ensured that her colleagues knew would be, carried out on them if they were found themselves in that sort of situation.
And of course, the secret that the book's title is about is, of course, her secret relationship with the MP Daryl Maguire, who seemed to be a bit of a wheeler and dealer. I think a bit like Arthur from Minder.
Yeah, absolutely,
a very good analogy for those of us who grew up watching that show. What was the most stunning revelation you heard about Daryl Maguire researching this book, or what was the most fascinating thing? He seemed to think he could almost get away with anything.
Do you know what I find is that he talked a big game, but he wasn't even really all that successful in being corrupt. He never actually pulled off, these big things. And one of his really good friends, who I didn't know they were so close until I researched the book, was the former Minister Michael McCormack, and he was very much of the view that Daryl was this kind of hard-working local member who did a lot of good stuff for Wagga Wagga, this country, well, big country city, but he never managed to land the big deals. He always had these pie in the sky ideas, these big warehouses that would bring in, I don't know, furniture, I think in one case from China, or it was a big, actually I think it was a big textiles, warehouse that was going to, it just never got there. A lot of his things never got off the ground. I think he's probably had a good sales mind. He was quite effective when he had the Harvey Norman franchise in Wagga Wagga, but I don't think he ever really landed at the big time in terms of big money making deals. And so I think probably, that's why it's such a fascinating story. This sort of bloke from the country who tried his best to make some big bucks and ended up secretly dating a very popular premier.
It's fascinating. The interesting thing for me reading this book is, are all MPs like this? Are all MPs secretly doing wheeling and dealing with big property developers all the time? Is this a part of state politics that just happens and we don't think about?
No, I would. Well, I'd certainly hope not, and I'm sure ICAC would be far busier if that was the case. I mean, you can't be running a side hustle. I mean, he used his office as a sort of a semi headquarters for a cash for visas scheme. It's almost too extraordinary to believe, but. I guess that was one sort of little enterprise he had that was at time making some money for him. But I think, I hope anyway, that by and large most MPs are far more smart about what they do and be aware of what they're in public life for. You don't have to be in public life. If you want to run your little businesses and have, all sorts of things on the go, that's fine. But you can't be an elected member of parliament at the same time.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. There was a great story in the book where he was almost selling access, I think, to the Premier. He was inviting people round to his office for drinks and, maybe we'll walk by Gladys's office or something. Wasn't that the case? One of my favourite
bits of that was, so there's all this stuff, he's having his mates come in, his developer mates. There was a bit in ICAC where they said it, and did you walk up to see Gladys with a glass of wine? Oh, no, I wouldn't allow that. I wouldn't let anyone walk around Parliament carrying alcohol. As if, I'll do a lot of other stuff, but I would not condone anyone having disrespect for the Parliament and, wandering around with alcohol.
Also, for me, another aspect of the story of the book is just kind of about love being blind. Like, did Gladys not see how dodgy Daryl was? Or was she just turning a blind eye?
I think love is blind often, isn't it? And I think, she said in her first public address, I think after she first appeared before ICAC when it emerged that they'd been in this relationship, that she'd known him for many, many years. She trusted him. He was very involved in the Liberal Party for a long time, as was she. She was quite, and she was very open about this herself, naive when it comes to love. She hadn't had long-term partners or boyfriends. He was older than her. And I think, I've often been asked, and I've thought a lot about why she didn't tell people about Daryl. And I think the reality is Daryl wasn't the type of guy that people thought she would be with. Her parents, she came from a very conservative, Armenian family. They would have wanted her to marry a nice Armenian guy. She lived at home till she was 29. She had a very sort of cloistered upbringing. And then also her colleagues were very quick to kind of say that Daryl Maguire is often the butt of their jokes. There was a really awkward moment in ICAC when her former chief of staff and friend Sarah Cruikshank had to admit that, she'd been quite embarrassed because she'd been quite free in giving her thoughts on Daryl Maguire to Gladys Berejiklian, completely, not knowing that the pair had been in this long-term relationship. And so I just think, part of the problem for Gladys with Daryl Maguire was she is a very private person, but also he wasn't the sort of person that people thought she would ever be with. And I think, as well as being a bit blinded by love, she kind of knew that maybe he wouldn't be well received by her friends and colleagues.
But then there's the other kind of dynamic, which is who chased who? Was Daryl trying to form a relationship with Gladys in the hope that, the highest politician in the state would turn a blind eye to his dodgy dealings?
I don't think so. I think he actually, maybe I'm just being a bit romantic here, but I actually think he really did love her. And I think she loved him. And I think, what was really interesting, and the reason why I think that is, at no point has any evidence come out where Daryl made a point of saying, or, you know, I'm with Gladys.
True.
Like, sure, he could have introduced her, but it was just through as another colleague, you know. He never made a point of saying, you know, I'm dating Gladys Berejiklian, stick with me and I can get you somewhere, you know. And so I think probably it was because he was in love with her, and I think she was in love with him. It's kind of just a tragic story, really.
Do you think to this day Berejiklian thinks she did anything wrong? In the phone tap, she was recorded saying, I don't need to know that bit.
So hopefully it's about half of all that gone now.
That's good. I don't need to know about that bit.
No, you don't.
Was it almost like a George Costanza or a Homer Simpson thinking around corruption? Like, it's not corruption if I don't know about it. Like, does she think she did anything wrong?
No. I think, you know, Gladys has never done anything wrong in her life, like in her mind, you know, and she is super straight-laced. She's always worked really hard. She would, you know, she's put her whole life on hold for public service, really, you know. She didn't have children. She didn't get married. And I think she really believes that she's always done the right thing, and there was nothing wrong here. She kept her private life to herself, and she really believes it didn't impact on any decision she made. And so therefore she did nothing wrong. She didn't resign because she did something wrong. She resigned because, like we were talking about at the beginning, she set some rules and she had to stick to those rules. So I don't think, you know, even the very last question that got put to Gladys at the ICAC hearing was, you know, if you had your time again, would you have declared the relationship? And she said no. So even on reflection, even being hauled through, you know, the process of ICAC, having some pretty rough months, she still said she wouldn't have done anything differently. So to me, that says, you know, she's pretty convinced she never did anything wrong.
One thing this book made me think about, I think I'm a fan of ICAC in New South Wales, but it did make me think maybe ICAC's definition of corruption is a little too broad. What do you think? It basically defines it as any dishonesty or a breach of public trust by a politician.
Yeah, look, I don't know. I suppose I'm only speaking very much as a layperson, not a lawyer, but you're right. The under the ICAC Act, it's really broad. And people think of corruption, don't they, as kind of money changing hands in brown paper bags and some high level, you know, and corruption is, and in the Act it does say, you know, bribery, treachery, some pretty serious stuff. But of course it's also about holding elected officials to account in terms of breaching public trust. And that's all breaching the ministerial code of conduct, which is probably where many people see the ICAC inquiry and findings going for Gladys Berejiklian. And, you know, more broadly, does the average voter think that that's corruption? Probably not. But I guess we still need some mechanism where people, you know, elected officials are held to account because obviously that's so important to the integrity of government and democracy. And
moving on to, I guess, Gladys's future. Scott Morrison, of course, famously tried to recruit her to run in Warringah at the federal election. Do you think she sees herself having a future in politics, or is she, even at one point, far in the future, or is she just done? Is she tapped out?
And I can't speak for her, but I really think she's not done. I think a lot will depend, of course, on what the ICAC actually finds and how damaging it is for her. But I think, you know, with a bit of time, she can definitely come back. I know that there are some in the Liberals that see her as their sort of great hope, you know, to rebuild federally. They need someone like Gladys Berejiklian to be there to sort of be the new face of a pretty troubled party at the moment. She's still really popular. I mean, there are a lot of people that didn't like Gladys, obviously, and felt that she did the wrong thing, but she had a lot of broad support, and I think she still would. A lot of people felt really sorry for her and thought that she was hard done by. And so I think if she wanted to make a political comeback, and I think she's so committed to the Liberal Party and feels so strongly about them, I reckon if they really came to her and begged her, it would be something she would consider. You know, I think she's so political. She's a real political animal, you know. She's not an accidental politician. She's very savvy when it comes to politics. So I reckon she could come back.
She copped a lot of flack from Western Sydney communities and the handling of the fumbling of the Delta outbreak. But do you think her downfall actually built sympathy with New South Wales voters if she does want to make a comeback? What's her standing now?
Yeah, I definitely think so. After all of that happened, yeah, sure, she was very much linked to kind of the city divided, with the lockdowns in the poorer part of Sydney. But I think there was a lot of sympathy for her. And I think, with time, I think Warringah would have been a problem for her this time. I think it was too soon. And it would still, we saw Di Lee, the new independent member for Fowler, talking this week in her maiden speech about how angry people were about those lockdowns.
The backbone of the New South Wales economy, if not the country. This was evident during COVID pandemic. The last time I looked, a government that takes away individuals' liberty to choose how they want to live, work and raise families was called a communist dictatorship.
I think there's still a lot of overall unhappiness with the New South Wales government, and of course Gladys Berejiklian was part of that for a time. But I definitely think there's public sympathy for her, and I think a lot of the anger, as we move through the pandemic already, people are starting, a lot of that's in the past already, and I think going forward, that will be even more so. Brilliant.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks a lot for your time. Any more books on the horizon? I don't know. Clearly busy.
I really enjoyed doing the books. I'd absolutely like it. I know some people, I've had friends who write books and say never again, but it's the opposite for me. I think it would be great. I'd love to do more.
Great. And where can people find you? I guess the Sydney Morning Herald is the main place.
Sydney Morning Herald, yep. I'm the state political editor, stuck in Macquarie Street.
Great. Well, we'll keep an eye out for you there. And The Secret is out now in all bookshops and booksellers. Thanks for your time, Alex.
Thank you.